Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an incredibly fascinating academic paper. It's called The Portion of Yahweh. And honestly, it completely reshapes how we understand the entire biblical narrative. It argues that for centuries, we've kind of been reading the Old and New Testaments with one eye closed. We've totally missed this massive, underlying cosmic war that literally drives the whole story from Genesis all the way to Revelation.
Okay, let's just start with a provocative question. What if everything we've been taught about the chosen people is actually missing half the story? The source text makes the case that we have profoundly misunderstood Israel's election, the whole idea of being chosen. Because if we don't grasp the ancient cosmological worldview those biblical authors were actually living and writing in, well, the concept of being chosen gets completely distorted into something the text just never intended.
The author points out that we usually fall into one of two traps here. On one side, you've got ethnic superiority, basically treating election like a divine VIP club based on merit, like one group was just intrinsically better. Then on the other side, there's replacement theology. That's the idea that Israel was just a failed experiment, entirely canceled and replaced by the Christian church. But here's the thing. The paper argues both of these views completely miss the deeper cosmological framework. They totally fail to see what Israel was actually chosen for.
To figure out what election really is, we have to look at this fascinating triad of cosmic rebellions the paper lays out. It's like a chain reaction of disasters that creates the massive predicament the rest of the Bible is desperately trying to solve. First, we've got Eden. Humanity rebels, wanting to be like gods, and boom, death and exile enter the picture. Second, the rebellion of the Watchers in Genesis 6. Divine beings cross the line, creating the Nephilim and bringing deep, dark corruption to the earth. And third, the Tower of Babel. This was a corporate human rebellion that led to a seriously shocking divine judgment, the literal disinheritance of humanity.
Now, what's incredibly fascinating here is what the original Dead Sea Scrolls text of Deuteronomy 32 reveals about that Babel event. Yahweh judicially divided humanity, but he didn't just scatter them around the map. He handed the nations over to subordinate divine beings, the lesser Elohim, or sons of God, to administer them. But he kept one portion for himself. He kept Israel. And here's the kicker. Israel wasn't chosen because they were so great. They were kept as the starting point for a brand new, ground-up recovery program.
So this brings up a concept the paper calls cosmic geography. In the ancient worldview, the map wasn't just physical, it was deeply spiritual. The lands of those disinherited nations were quite literally the territorial domains of those lesser gods, who, by the way, eventually went totally corrupt. Meanwhile, the land of Israel was Yahweh's direct territorial inheritance. Israel was set up as a divine holding action. Think of it like a localized territory of pure holy ground, a literal beachhead from which the ultimate rescue mission was going to be launched.
And this is a huge mix-up the paper clears up for us. Being part of this elect beachhead, it actually wasn't about automatic personal salvation. We're so used to thinking of salvation as this individual eternal destiny thing, right? But biblical election in the Old Testament was corporate. It was vocational. It basically meant you were drafted. You were chosen to be an instrument of history to ultimately go out and reclaim those disinherited nations.
So what did this draft actually entail? Well, the chosen community was granted 5 very specific privileges. They got unique divine revelation, a direct system of worship, a clear path to redemption, a vocation to be a conduit of blessing to the rest of the world, and the strict obligation of faithful obedience. And again, they weren't handed all this just to be an elite club. Think about what a priest does. They stand between God and the people. Israel was called to stand between God and those disinherited nations to eventually bring them back home. Let's actually look at how this plays out in the everyday lives of biblical characters. Because once you grasp this cosmic geography stuff, some of the most bizarre moments in the Bible suddenly make perfect sense. Take David. When he's running for his life from King Saul, he cries out that he's being forced to serve other gods. He didn't mean he was suddenly changing his religion, he meant he was physically crossing the border, leaving Yahweh's territory, and entering the domain of corrupt lesser gods. Or what about Naaman the Syrian? The guy gets healed and then literally asks for 2 mule loads of Israelite dirt to take back home to Syria. Why? So he could physically stand on Yahweh's holy ground and worship him, right in the middle of enemy territory. I mean, how cool is that?
This just totally reframes the entire Old Testament for us. It isn't just a dry, boring record of ancient Middle Eastern politics or random tribal skirmishes. The author argues it's an active, real-time record of a long, territorial cosmic war. When Joshua leads the conquest of Canaan, it wasn't just about getting land. It was about purging the lingering remnants of the Watchers' rebellion, those Nephilim bloodlines, from Yahweh's holy turf. And when the prophets are speaking out, they aren't just yelling at human kings. They are actively confronting the corrupt territorial powers pulling the strings behind them.
And let's talk numbers for a second, because details matter.
According to the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, there were exactly 70 disinherited nations. 70 nations handed over to those corrupt gods at the Tower of Babel. Just left waiting in the dark, separated from their creator, waiting for this massive redemptive beachhead program to finally break through and reach them.
So if Babel was the grand disinheritance, what was the reversal? This is where the paper delivers an absolute paradigm shift. It points to the New Testament event of Pentecost in Acts 2. You know, Pentecost wasn't just some random miracle where people suddenly spoke in tongues. Look at the absolute symmetry here. At Babel, Yahweh scatters the nations and confuses their languages. At Pentecost, the Spirit gathers representatives from those exact same scattered nations and translates the languages. It is a targeted strike. It's the exact moment the cosmic reclamation campaign officially kicks off.
We actually see this play out perfectly with the Apostle Paul in Acts 17. He's standing at the Areopagus in Athens, literally the philosophical heart of the disinherited Gentile world, and he uses this exact Deuteronomy 32 framework. He publicly announces to the Greeks that God had previously set their boundaries, but, well, the time of the lesser gods is definitively over. The resurrection happened, the cosmic shift occurred, and the reclamation of the nations is actively underway right now.
Now, the mechanism for this massive cosmic takeover centers entirely on Jesus. The paper points out that Jesus is the absolute hinge of history. He systematically reverses all three of those original cosmic rebellions we talked about. As the seed of the woman, he crushes the serpent, completely undoing Eden. As the obedient son, he overcomes the earthly corruption that started with the Watchers. And as the seed of Abraham, he becomes the ultimate conduit of blessing to the nations, completely undoing the massive disinheritance of Babel.
Therefore, and this is a crucial takeaway, the church doesn't replace Israel at all. Actually, scratch that. It doesn't just not replace it. It inherits that exact same original priestly vocation. Because Jesus fulfilled the assignment, anyone united to him, whether Jew or Gentile, becomes part of this ultimate end-times body. The church's whole purpose is to expand that original Israelite beachhead into a massive, global campaign to bring all 70 of those disinherited nations back home to Yahweh. When we look at the Apostle Paul's famous olive tree metaphor in Romans 11 through this specific lens, it all clicks. We see one unified redemptive program. You've got the natural branches representing faithful Israel. Then you have the wild branches. Those are the Gentile believers from the disinherited nations who are now being rescued and grafted right in. And yes, you have the temporarily broken branches, unbelieving Israel. But notice the key detail. They all share the exact same root. It isn't a new tree. It's the glorious expansion of the original one. Because of this shared root, the author insists we absolutely cannot write off the original covenant people. Paul says it clearly in Romans 11:29. The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. God doesn't just cancel his promises because of human failure. No way. The paper notes this sets up an incredible expectation for the end of history. We're looking toward an ultimate, unified restoration where those broken natural branches are grafted right back into the tree where they belong.
Which leads us to a stunning eschatological conclusion, basically how the whole story ends. If we compare the state of the world before the cross to the ultimate finish line, the final state of the universe completely dissolves those old Babel boundaries. The disinheritance, completely healed. The contested cosmic geography, over. The entire earth is turned back into Yahweh's pure, uncontested inheritance.
And honestly, perhaps the most mind-expanding takeaway from this entire explainer is this. The redeemed church, Jew and Gentile united together, is destined to literally displace those corrupt lesser gods. The paper points to passages in Revelation arguing that redeemed humanity will actually take over their administrative authority. We are slated to form the new divine council, ruling the cosmos right alongside the Creator.
So I want to leave you with a profound thought to chew on. Since this hidden cosmic war reveals that we aren't just saved to sit around in some quiet, boring heavenly retirement, but are actually called to govern a reclaimed universe, how does that change the way you view your own spiritual vocation right now, today? It's a pretty incredible paradigm shift from a truly fascinating academic paper. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep exploring.